My name is Jacob Skidmore. I am known online as the Nameless Narcissist, and I have been professionally diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. This is everything that I'm authorized to tell you. Everybody thinks that they know a narcissist. I personally have never met somebody diagnosed in real life other than myself, and I've never met somebody that I even suspected was one. The issue with how people use the term narcissist is that it's always to pathologize somebody's behavior because their behavior has hurt me in some way. I don't like hurting people for hurting's sake. Narcissistic personality disorder specifically is characterized by grandiosity, a lack of reciprocal relationships, lack of empathy. Grandiosity, by the way, meaning basically I think I'm better than everybody else, in short. It's like imposter syndrome on steroids. Since everything I do does go through this lens of what is this going to make people think about me? How can I kind of modify how I'm presenting in order to get that reaction that I need? We have a flawed way of viewing and interacting with the world. It comes with like a lot of cognitive distortions and defense mechanisms of varying kind of presentations. In the DSM-5, there's 9 criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, but you only need 5 to actually be diagnosed. The issue with that is kind of that you have like, I think it's like 200 types of narcissists, in quotes, that you can encounter due to how the diagnostic criteria kind of present. But that's mainly because the current diagnostic criteria is very focused on external behaviors that clinicians can identify in an office. I think the biggest difference between self-confidence and narcissism is where self-love comes into it. Because like a lot of people want to view narcissism through this lens of too much self-love. You love yourself too much. You can only have empathy for yourself. There is no self-love. There is no empathy for yourself when it comes to pathological narcissism. It's just grandiosity. I hate myself, but I'm better than everybody else. Could be like the tagline of it. Genuine self-confidence comes from a place of self-compassion. So self-love, I can say very confidently, there's never been a time in my life that I felt like an ounce of love for myself. If anything, it's just this constant need to be better than what I am right now and then better than the people around me. And this anxiety that I'm kind of like falling behind in that race. By the way, I can't speak for everybody when we talk about narcissistic personality disorder. I'm not a clinician or anything. I just live with the disorder, and this is everything I say here is just based off of the research that I've done and me living with it, basically. It's hard to say for me, like, when narcissism first kind of presented, because it's like, this disorder is egosyntonic, which means that, like, I view it as normal. I view my behaviors, thoughts, and actions as normal, and then it gets really hard to kind of distinguish, especially in my early years. But the first thing that I remember that was like kind of more tangible was when I was like, I don't know, 8 or 9. I was at this funeral for a family member of mine. And I just remember being really frustrated and very like annoyed at everyone there because everyone was, you know, grieving. They're like crying and stuff. And I was just like thinking like, oh, these people are being so dramatic and performative because they feel like that's what they have to do, or they want the attention for themselves. They're like trying to cry and make this funeral about them. That's rude. I'm a very polite person. I don't like that kind of stuff. We were on the car ride home, and I remember what my mom said, but she said something that kind of made me be like, maybe there's a little bit more genuine, maybe I might be the odd one out here in terms of like not really feeling that grief and I wasn't being performative, but I was, you know, obviously, this is why I hate funerals. I'm worried that people are going to notice that I'm not feeling crap. But like, obviously I was to some degree appearing sad because that was the thing that you do at funerals. When I got into high school, roughly, a little bit before high school, I picked up on like people who were a lot more outgoing or saying funny things. People were paying attention to them. I knew I wanted that. I wanted to be the person that could like run a room and be charming and everything. And I remember I was like sitting at a lunch table and like the entire period, like I was the center of attention, making everybody laugh. I could not tell you a single thing that was said during that period, but I remember walking away feeling elated. I felt high because of just the amount of attention and crap that I was getting. It kind of stuck with me in that moment of, this is what makes me feel good, and I want to do anything I can to maintain that. The first time it was ever mentioned to me, though, was I was like 16 years old, and because of my home life wasn't great, the psychologist during that time mentioned narcissistic personality disorder, and you can get diagnosed that young, but most don't go that route. I remember he said something about me matching the criteria to a T or something like that. And I just didn't really care at the time because I was 16 and whatever. But it was always kind of in the back of my head after that, where I was just kind of like, maybe that's something I have, but even if I do, who cares? And if I do have it, that just makes me better than people. Yeah, I'm good at manipulating people. Yeah, I don't have emotions like the rest of you idiots. Yeah. At one point I called it, it was so dumb. I cringe like thinking about it, but at one point I was like, well, narcissistic personality disorder is basically the logical conclusion of human social evolution, because in my mind I was like, oh, this is how you have to operate to get ahead. All of my life feels like an act. Everything feels like performative to some degree. Even when I'm alone, I'm just very acutely aware of how I would be perceived in any given moment. Whether it be what I say or how I'm moving, how my head's positioned sometimes. Whenever I'm thinking about something, it's like I'm imagining me describing it to somebody else and what their reactions would be to me describing it to them, how I would say it in a way that would elicit admiration. It makes everything feel very disingenuous. And like an issue that I've had since I started therapy is trying to be genuinely vulnerable with people, trying to emotionally connect with people. I'm sober now, but I used to get really wasted just so I could try to broach that vulnerability. And even when I would do that, it didn't feel real. There was always parts of it that I was modifying in order to get those self-esteem needs met, because at the end of the day, those self-esteem needs trump everything else. I literally can't be genuine because being admired is too important. The only thing that feels real beyond a benefit of a doubt is when I completely lose control in anger or something, when I'm just screaming my head off at somebody because I'm so just pissed off. It's like I view the world through second person. I view the world only through how I might be being perceived at any given time and how to kind of maximize admiration through that. For example, if somebody's envious of me, I often view that as admiration in a way. And I become a little bit insulted if somebody's not envious of me. The biggest myth that I kind of get frustrated by is that there's this attribution of malice to a lot of my behaviors. I'm not saying I haven't hurt people. I've hurt a lot of people in my life, and I try to own those things the best that I can. But when a lot of people that you see discussing it online are they describe the sadism that oh, they enjoy hurting you and stuff like that. And I'm like, I'm not motivated by that. This sounds callous, but you're not important enough for me to feel like I would enjoy hurting. At the end of the day, it's not that we're out here to cause damage and hurt people for no reason. It's just that we don't have those tools that are accessible to kind of alleviate not only our own suffering, but suffering of the people around us. It's just an objective lie that narcissists can't change. People with narcissistic personality disorder in treatment, it was over 50% of them went into remission. Don't get me wrong, that's low for for any mental disorder. And remission doesn't necessarily mean cured. These people probably still think like narcissists, but through treatment, they're better with vulnerability and connecting, and they don't meet the symptom criteria anymore. They're more functional and everything, but it's okay, does that mean that they're not narcissists? Probably not. It just means that they can, they've seen the error of their ways to a degree, and now through treatment, they have been able to adjust accordingly. This is a treatable condition. Now, I want to clarify, because I feel like a lot of people, when they hear me say that, their immediate thought is, oh, that means this person that I'm close to can change. Can doesn't mean will. It's I always tell people, you can't have expectations of people that they're going to change for you or for anybody unless they have a vested interest in it. You have to take people for who they are. Are you comfortable with this person in your life, with the boundaries that you have and how they treat you in that moment? If so, then fine, keep them in their life. If not, then don't. Why do I think the word narcissist has been weaponized? Maybe it's just a cool word, honestly, narcissist. Some people started talking about the impact that somebody with narcissistic personality disorder had because so many people online are constantly talking about how, I was with this person, he was a narcissist, and that has weight. And that gives people an appreciation for how much they went through. But it feels like we got to kind of this tipping point where a lot of people feel like their trauma or negative experiences have to be almost validated by the fact that this person is a caricature of evil. How could I actually seek real treatment for that when that's the idea around it? And that kind of stigma has gone deep. The diagnostic criteria for NPD can be twisted so easily to just fit any arrogant person. There's a lot of things like online that you read about, they'll never admit that they're wrong. That's not a diagnostic criteria. That can apply to anybody. Don't get me wrong, I get defensive and I am always right, but no, I'm joking. But like, that's not part of the diagnostic criteria. This applies to a lot of abusive people. So it's just become a convenient catch-all because of the definition that's taken up nowadays because of this need for people to feel like their trauma is valid. My disorder plays out in romantic and platonic relationships very differently, actually. Like in romantic relationships, there's a different expectation because, oh, I'm with this person, they're my partner, they inherently have to be my equal. So they're actually held to a lot higher standards in regards to how I expect them to be performing. Because that's like, oh, if you can't make me look bad, if you're below average and I'm below average, why would I be with somebody who is lesser than me? And like a lot of people talk about, oh, like narcissists are very controlling. In relationships, I'm just not at all. Like in my platonic friendships, I can be, but that's because it's like this person inherently has to be my equal in order for me to even view the relationship as worth it. I am criminally distant in my relationships because showing that I have this affection for them is humiliating and hard, and that implies a degree of dependency on them. Yeah, it is shameful when somebody hugs you and you can tell they think they have this deep emotional connection with you and you're just not there. There's shame in that, and some self-disgust. If people know that you care about them, they are going to use that. They are going to either take it for granted, best case scenario, or whatever. If they don't know that you care, they'll always be chasing after you. And that gives you much more of an upper hand. What I would always say when I was younger especially is like love is like a carrot on a stick, right? They hold it in front of you and tell you to behave, and if you don't, then they'll take it away. So a common pattern in romantic relationships that I typically have is, it usually starts out the same way, right? I meet somebody who I'm like, oh, this person's perfect. This is somebody that can actually understand me. This person is on my level, so to speak. This person is superior like I am. But what happens unconsciously when you kind of put somebody up like that and you're like, oh, this is an ideal person who I admire, and then by association, I am also special, is that it's very easy for that kind of illusion to break. It'll be like the most minor thing. I remember once, there was this girl I was like, that I was very, that I cared a lot about in the moment. I was very excited about this person, and like I showed pictures of her to some of my friends. And I remember one of my friends just kind of said, oh, she's not my type or something like that. And it was like a light switch. And I knew it was happening, and I didn't want it to, but it was like at that moment, because it wasn't this perfect idealized image of somebody, because somebody else had an opinion that differed, it like changed my opinion in terms of like, oh, this isn't my soulmate. This isn't the perfect person. This is somebody that's beneath me. I can't stay in this relationship. Then, started pushing them away and like being a dick, like I do. and that eventually ended. Or alternatively, what happens is they'll see a moment of me that's too real. But I remember once, like I was in this relationship with somebody. The beginning of the end was we went to this party, and like I was pretty wasted. And we got back to her apartment, and like I started vomiting in the toilet and just sobbing about how I was broken and defective, etc. And I was like yelling at her, but then like secretly wanted her to like comfort me. It was like a whole thing. I hated that she saw me that weak and pathetic, and like I never brought it up after that. We literally never talked about it. I was like she's judging me. She thinks she can take advantage of me now because she realizes that I'm weak. She probably thinks that she can do better now. So I blew that relationship up. Those are typically the two ways the romantic relationships go. My platonic relationships, as long as I keep you at a distance, like we gotta like it can go on indefinitely. Typically, I can manage those because there's less of a demand for emotional intimacy a lot better. I have one friend who, it was funny, where I asked them once if they ever had watched any of my videos. I don't like it when people I know in real life do that. And they were like, no. And they had kind of like a very strong reaction to it. And I was like, okay, I'm glad, but like, why? And they said, you know, I know you well enough to know there's a lot of things that go on inside your head that I'm better off not knowing. If somebody can look at me and my behaviors through the lens of me and not through the lens of my disorder, I know that that's somebody that's good to have in my life. If I'm going to get into a relationship with you, no matter how recovered I am, you deserve to know what you're getting into to some degree. When I am withdrawing from admiration, so to speak, it's falling back into those vulnerable narcissistic patterns, I would say. I get really paranoid. I get really neurotic, very distressed. Sometimes it's like I'm being reminded of everything that I hate about myself, and it's all more real. It looks like psychosis, like if somebody on the outside were to see it like that, just because of how paranoid and angry and distraught I become. I also tend to withdraw socially a lot more. Like I'll isolate. It sucks because it's like I'll isolate myself because I'm not getting the attention I think I deserve and I desire and need. But then, you know, isolating myself makes it so I literally can't get those things. People with narcissistic personality disorder struggle vocationally when it comes to having a job. As for my previous jobs, I was in the Army. My first job ever, I worked at a nursing home actually as a dietary aide. I washed dishes, but I always say dietary aide, it sounds better. Did that for 2 years, went to college for a little bit, then went into the Army. I was a MP in the Army, but that was the Ohio National Guard, so I came back, went back to college for a semester, but after basic training, I was like, I don't have the headspace right now to do college. So I was a corrections officer for 2 years, worked at a prison. I can't actually talk about my current day job because it's actually a stipulation of my employment. So I'll just say I work in tech. A lot of the times it's like it causes dysfunction in your work. I think a good example of this is when I was in the Army. I couldn't handle it being at the bottom of the totem pole all the time. There's like this objective hierarchy and I was always so resentful and bitter and just like paranoid and insecure because it's like objectively I am lowest tier that there is. That conflict when you have this drive to be at the top causes problems in basically any work environment. It makes it kind of impossible for you to work as a team unless you're in charge. If my experience does match a job, but I view it as beneath me, as like menial work, as something that people wouldn't respect, I won't take it because I view it as beneath me. There was a time in my life actually where like it got really bad because I was having a hard time finding work. I was behind on my mortgage. I'm going to lose my house and I would rather die than be humiliated with a job that is pathetic and beneath me and or be homeless and stuff like that. I do my best not to tell anybody around me, like in my professional life, my diagnosis, just because it causes more problems than it's worth. I mean, people close to me obviously know at this point, and it's also just kind of embarrassing to admit that like I have like this condition that like makes me sound like an edgy teenager trying to articulate it, you know what I mean? I would say society rewards narcissistic traits, and I'm emphasizing traits because I don't think it rewards pathological narcissism. If you're a little arrogant, half the battle is, taking chances, right? Is putting yourself out there. That kind of grandiosity and arrogance thinking that, oh, this thing's going to go well, and putting yourself in a position like where you're actually willing to take that chance. That's a very objectively a good trait to have. Extroversion can be very good for the grandiose narcissism. The superficial charm can be very useful. That being said, the things that get you to the place that you want to be at aren't the same traits that are going to be able to maintain where you're at, if that makes sense. If we're talking about healthy narcissism, yeah, 100% it does. If we're talking about pathological, there's just too much dysfunction that comes with it for it to possibly be rewarded. I went into therapy to impress the girl that I had this on and off thing with. It's like, look how healthy and mature I am. I go to therapy. I'm great. That obviously didn't last. And while I was still in therapy, but not in either of those relationships, I just started thinking, why did I sabotage a relationship that was, relatively speaking, actually good for me And around that time, I started thinking more about my childhood stuff, and I was like, I should probably get to the bottom of some of this stuff. And so I ended up staying in therapy. 2 years go by, and the entire time, it's like those defenses against vulnerability, it's like the shame catches the words in your throat, and you just lie through your teeth the entire time. Until one day, I was complaining about somebody in my life. I was frustrated because it's that feeling like you can only be understood by other special people. They could never understand me. And like I sit back and I think for a second, and I just like start chuckling and just kind of blurt out, well, I can't blame them though. I mean, they're all so stupid. And my therapist kind of was taken off guard because I had presented as rather mild-mannered and polite up until that point. And she was just like, what? And I was like, I mean, look at them. They all complain that I think I'm better than them, but I'm smarter, I'm more attractive, I'm more charismatic. I mean, I am better. How could they possibly understand me? And she's like, and these are your friends? And I'm like, yeah, just because like, what's that supposed to mean? I stand up to go, and I'm like, that felt good to finally get off my chest. Then she was like, well, I'm humbled. And I said, are you mocking me? And then diagnosed shortly after that whole thing, because after the dam broke in that regard, it became a lot easier to kind of be genuine. I mean, it's still hard. I'm a lot more truthful nowadays, but it's still not something that I'm good at, even in a therapeutic setting. The current DSM criteria kind of neglects the fluctuation in self-esteem. A lot of people know that narcissists, despite their grandiosity, have a very chronic need for attention, specifically admiration, because basically our entire self-esteem is regulated externally. Either I feel like I'm better than everybody else, or I feel like I'm worse than everybody else, and I need constant feedback to kind of prevent myself from slipping into this cycle of self-hate, where I can get rather bad. Self-destructive usually is the word that I would use. I do actually recommend instead the DSM-5 alternative criteria in the section 3. It's less of categorical, and it's like a spectrum model where it's like, okay, they recognize varying severities and presentations aside from your kind of classic, oh, this guy is full of himself and manipulative and kind of a dick. Don't get me wrong, I'm all of those things, but the disorder in itself, it has to focus more on some of the interpersonal dysfunctions. The DSM-5 criteria for narcissistic personality disorder is, the first one is grandiosity. There's arrogant and haughty behaviors, interpersonal exploitation, which I do want to touch on because a lot of people hear that and they're thinking, oh, exploiting somebody for money or something like that, which is probably where my mind would go as well. But this is associated more with, again, the self-esteem regulation that I mentioned earlier. For example, let's say dating somebody because they make you appear higher status or gives you connections to people that make you seem higher status. There is also chronic envy of others or believing others are envious of them. I fall more in that second category of believing everyone's envious of me. That one sucks. Then there's entitlement. This one's probably my weakest trait, personally. How it usually would present for me, though, is expectations of extreme loyalty to people. And it would be rationalized with me where it's like, oh, I deserve better friends who will be loyal and fight my battles for me because I'm such a loyal person. That's not really true if I'm being honest with myself, but that is something I believed at the time and how it was really rationalized. Grandiose fantasies of unlimited success, wealth, power, brilliance. There's a lot of maladaptive daydreaming actually that occurs in this disorder, and a lot of our personal goals are based around these grandiose fantasies. Like very common example is you see somebody who maybe they're in middle management of a company and they're dreaming that, oh, I'm going to like own this company one day, I'm going to have this conglomerate that has all this wealth and power. Or I guess with me and my social media, it's like, oh, I'm going to be famous and stuff. Unrealistic kind of goals for themselves kind of arise from this. And yeah, lack of empathy. So this one's kind of weird because it's one of the, a lot of people consider it more of a hallmark of the disorder, but recently that's come under a lot of scrutiny. We have a good awareness of what other people are thinking and feeling, but we can't emotionally connect with that. Like if you're sad and your mom died or something, like I can recognize, obviously, oh yeah, that's a sad thing to happen to somebody. I can't feel anything though. I have spent years explaining my disorder inside and out, trying to make sense of it. When I started kind of telling my story online, People were finding help on this, and that wasn't even my intent. My intent going online was being like, hey, you guys are dumb. This isn't what my disorder is like. Fix it. But then people were like, hearing your lived experience, actually, this makes a lot of sense for, this thing I experienced with XYZ. It did let me look at a lot of my behaviors from a third-party perspective, right? I wouldn't get defensive because this wasn't about me, but it's like, oh, I can relate to that and I can see exactly how that could have impacted this person, so I can see how my actions impacted other people around me. I will say, at first it definitely did embolden my grandiosity a bit. But there's also the hypersensitivity to criticism that comes with this disorder. It also would like turn me into those vulnerable states a lot where I would just get so pissed off and just ruin my day because I got one bad comment or whatever. I had a tendency that in sharing my vulnerability online, that was a way for me to kind of regain control over it and make it not vulnerable anymore. Going online and being reduced to a caricature of myself in order to disseminate information, that reinforces and rewards some of the things about my disorder that are the most distressing to me. Social media, because of it's a numbers game, it really plays on some of the worst tendencies of mine. It's like obsessing over, why am I not at this number yet? Why is my watch time lower in this video? Oh, did I stutter in this? Whatever. I can't rewatch any video I make. I literally cannot. I'm at a point in my life where I'm like, I don't really want to spend all of my life talking about the worst thing about me. And so, I think that earnestly, my experience online would have been largely more of a net positive if I wasn't so young. I think I started YouTube when I was 23 or something like that. I mean, and I'm only 26 now. And I was diagnosed for maybe a year before I made that YouTube channel. I do not think I was ready in the slightest to have a public presence like that. I never really viewed doing social media through that lens of social responsibility, not at first. I was just like, I'm just a dude on the internet putting my voice out there. And I kind of maintained that kind of headspace for a long time where I was like, I can say whatever I want. This is my YouTube channel, this is my TikTok, this is my whatever. But then there gets to a point where it's like, oh, I know the things that I post, hundreds of thousands of people might see it. And there is a degree of responsibility there in terms of the messaging and the real impact that it does have. And it's something that I do shy away. I'm very careful not to give advice because I don't feel comfortable giving advice because my life is a wreck. How can I tell you how to live your life? When people are like, oh, there's narcissists in my life, XYZ, what do I do here? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know enough about your situation. I don't even know how to handle myself, let alone another narcissist that I've never met. And then there's also the fact of I feel a degree of responsibility to the people who also have narcissistic personality disorder because I know that growing up, I would have given anything to have somebody that I felt like I could actually relate to, especially at some of the dark times in my life, right? I've had a lot of people say, DM me and be like, you helped me get diagnosed, or it's so refreshing hearing somebody else that I can actually relate to, stuff like that. That's something that honestly does keep me going and a little bit more earnest nowadays, just because I'm that feels like something that I can feel good about doing that's not purely tied to my own grandiosity. I want it to be understood through the lens of that I am a sick person and that I don't want to be like this. I don't want to be demonized for it, but I don't want it to be something that is viewed as acceptable. All those things, it does get very difficult to balance. And it's not something that I ever think I'm going to master balancing, but whatever. I need to be able to recognize that I can be in recovery from this and still maintain a public presence and be able to speak very well on the disorder without that making me fraudulent somehow. And honestly, now that I've worked on them a lot, it's made me really not value the presence as much as I once did. It's something that once I get to a place in my life where I'm ready to, I do just kind of want to walk away from. Treatment for NPD takes a lot of forms, and therapy is only one piece of that, right? If you go to your appointments and, do what I was doing and lie through your teeth and do nothing else, you're not going to get very far. Treatment typically does look like there's classic psychoanalysis and just counseling in general. I know that there's various forms of therapy for it. I hear schema therapy is very effective. Mentalization-based treatment is actually one of my favorites. Sometimes they'll put you on a mood stabilizer. That's where I was. They also put me on an atypical antipsychotic for the same reasons, just to act as a mood stabilizer. Depression can be very common with narcissistic personality disorder, so that has to be treated most of the time. And also substance abuse. It's a very high percentage of people with narcissistic personality disorder have a comorbid substance abuse disorder, usually alcohol followed by cocaine use. I've always had a weakness for alcohol. I'm sober now, but like I had a really bad problem with it because it enables you to kind of a lot of the anxiety that I mentioned earlier around social interaction, and it gives you a little bit more social boldness. And I was also using it because I was like, this is a way to be able to get vulnerable with people. Not sustainable, obviously. It's going to be different for everybody just because when it's a personality disorder, there's so many aspects to work on and so many things that you have to address that unfortunately, there's not just one thing that's going to work for everybody with the condition. And especially since comorbidities, borderline personality disorder, histrionic, and antisocial personality disorder specifically, are very, very common. It's like, if you have one personality disorder, you more than, like most people have, I don't know if it's most, but it's like a very high amount have a second comorbid personality disorder. Now, it's treatable. It can be managed. It can go into remission. There's some clinicians that seem more optimistic with how far that can go. There's some that are just like, you just have to manage symptoms, and that's basically the most that you can do. I don't think it can be cured. I don't like using that term because I do think there's a lot about how my brain functions that, yeah, it's not going away. Progress is slow. You have to look at it over a very long period of time because it's like you're going to feel like a lot of times that you're not making progress until you like look at yourself a year ago and you're like, whoa, that was a different person. That's crazy, actually. When I first got diagnosed, it was like, all right, how many times have I yelled at people this month? And just when that started going down. It's gradual is the thing. It's a lonely disorder. It really is. I've always been acutely aware of my loneliness. And like that's always been and that was always my goal. I didn't want to be lonely anymore. If I'm being honest, it doesn't bother me as much nowadays just because it's like, as I've grown older, it's like the repeated failures to like really connect to people really started to just like grind on me. But that made me realize that for so long I was trying to force it. And in the wake of that, it allowed some friendships that I didn't expect to be as meaningful as they are to slowly gain importance over time.
Hi, I'm a producer and Authorized account. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and comment with more topics that you'd like us to cover in this series.